Ruth Hazleton from a Hidden Culture blog here, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Andy Irvine in Ireland. Thank you so much for joining me today, Andy. It's lovely to see you.
And you, it's great to see you, Ruthie. Great to see you.
I wanted to ask you, and I've been meaning to ask you for years actually, do you remember your first trips to Australia and your impressions of this country? I think there are a lot of countries around the world that probably feel like you're, belong to them as well. We do feel a little bit like you belong to us here in Australia because you come back so often. So can you remember the first few times you came here and what it is that brings you back?
The first time I came to Australia was in 1984. And it was the middle of winter. It was June. And it was one of the things I do remember was how in country towns, in people's houses where I'd stay, I was freezing cold, and there seemed to be no kind of they didn't seem to have discovered how to heat up a house. And but it was all over the country. It wasn't in Western Australia, but it was played in Alice Springs and Darwin, and it was a great tour. And I was. When I got home, I thought, well, did you enjoy that, Andy? And I thought, yes, I did. I really did. And at the time, I'd heard about this festival in Mullaney, and I thought, well, I'd like to go back in the Australian summertime. So I think a year or two later, I was invited to Mullaney, and I've been coming back ever since, as you say, and I've loved it. I mean, one of the reasons I love it most is because of its huge size and a road. You drive a road and you can drive forever and ever and ever. And most of the songs I have written in the last 20 years have had their start in Australia, because driving a car is great. I always found was a great way of clearing the head and thinking poetically.
Well, you're certainly in the perfect place for that then, aren't you?
Yes,
Australia's like that. And has the landscape also had an impact, do you think, on your?
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it. You know, I mean, I remember I've driven over I've driven to Perth a few times, and over the Nullarbor, which most people I think would say, oh yeah, it's a long, boring road, but it isn't. You know, it suddenly the countryside changes as you drive, and you suddenly look out and you think, oh, look at that! It's not the same as it was 5 minutes ago. And no, I love it. I just I miss it so much.
You have written a lot of songs based on your time in Australia. My Heart's Tonight in Ireland. I'm just remembering, the ones that you've spoken about on stage. But also what I might do is just pop in a song to begin with that you've recorded for us previously called Gunshot Creek. Do you want to tell us the story, the fateful story of Gunshot Creek?
Well, me and Cian, my son, went up in a Land Cruiser to Cape York about nearly 20 years ago now, and we had an accident up and crossing all these creeks, which was nerve-wracking. I mean, the water in the creeks was not very deep, so there was no kind of there wasn't water up to the windscreen or anything like that. But some of the creek crossings, the exits and the entrances are a little bit difficult. And of course, I'm not only not the world's greatest driver, I'm certainly not the world's greatest four-wheel driver. And we tried to do Gunshot Creek, and we did well. We fell off we turned upside down, in fact, and there was one other vehicle there who helped us. And but everywhere we went in the area of Cape York after that, people said, "Oh yeah, you're the boys who rolled your truck at Gunshot." So it was as if it was like kind of oh yeah, we were there. It was like so that was the basis for the song. That there was thousands of people there, and they all enjoyed it.
Well, here's a tale be dad concerning me and my young lad, and the old Toyota HJ60 that we once had. Been travelling many's a day up far north Queensland way, and everything okay till we reached Gunshot Creek, Gunshot Creek. The memories of that afternoon leave me feeling weak. If we went back there today, we'd be remembered right away. They'd say, here come the boys who rolled their truck at Gunshot. In the early morning sun, we'd been crossing creeks for fun, though at Palm Creek the water was quite deep and troublesome. But we crossed at the right speed with the bow wave that you need, and the steep and muddy exit easily won. Our confidence was high as Gunshot drew nigh, and the devil only knows why he made me hit the throttle. And my son, he shouted, eat dad, I think we're up shit creek, dad. We're about to wind up, eat dad in the water. Gunshot Creek, Gunshot Creek. We came tearing down that slope as though we might get there last week. The circus came to town with myself as the chief clown, and we pulled the house down, so to speak. Now I love these lonely places and these wide open spaces, but nothing pulls a crowd like an impending disaster. And as I crashed the truck, we heard cries of holy, and we realized that the crowd was growing faster. Gunshot Creek, Gunshot Creek. So many people there, they were dancing cheek to cheek, and one and all did say, thanks mates for the display. Well, you really made our day here at Gunshot. Up steps a man called Jack, says I'm a bushy mate from way back, and I knows this old telegraph track backwards, and I wouldn't see you stuck by misfortune or ill luck, and I'm here to help you get your track back upwards. He had one of those straps, he produced one of those straps, and he says now perhaps if I tie it to the back of me old wagon, well, she'll be right if we tie her nice and tight, and we'll get your truck back up, lads, that's the fashion. This battle it was won, and we surveyed the damage done. My old HJ60 was no longer at the races, where the windscreen once had been, you could see out nice and clean, and the dusty road was blowing in our faces. Gunshot Creek, Gunshot Creek. Not everybody's cup of tea, so to speak. Everybody that we meet says thanks for shouting us that treat. What a spectacular feat that was at Gunshot. Our hearty thanks to Jack, for he got us back on track, and our trip to the tip was not a failure. Oh, I never thought we'd be looking out across the sea from the northernmost headland of Australia. What I did wrong that day, well, I couldn't rightly say, but what infamy we gained there at Gunshot. Of success I've had my share, but nothing to compare with the round of applause me and my son got. Gunshot Creek, Gunshot Creek. If I only could, I'd go back there next week. One can win success, but notoriety, ha ha, yes. And we're the boys who stood our truck at Gunshot. Here come the boys who rolled their truck at Gunshot.
So I wanted to ask you, your early career was based a lot around traditional music, and songwriting has become more and more your thing, I'd say. Is that a fair enough statement to make later on in life? How does Andy Irvine go about writing a song? Do you tend to come up with melodies in your head first, or lyric, or a topic, or an idea?
Well, it's the process happens sometimes almost in some I don't know, in some other conscious state. So that it's a difficult question to answer, because I can never quite remember how I did it or how I arrived at a finished or semi-finished article. I think that sometimes the words come first, yeah. But very quickly a tune is attached before the song is finished. There's a verse and I'm singing it to some tune, and then that gradually, that process gets gradually ironed out, and then, I mean, sometimes I sit. This hasn't happened for a long time. Sometimes I'd sit down and I'd start writing. I'd start thinking of something and I'd write it down, and then I'd continue, and then about 6 hours later, I'd suddenly kind of, it was as if kind of, oh yeah, here I am, like, and here this piece of music and words were there, you know. And I thought, how did I arrive at this? It's a lot of trial and error goes on, you know. And
do you ever deliberately sit down to write, or is the process just this spontaneous process?
Well, it very often happens, as I said, when I'm driving and I have to stop and write down a verse and then drive on. I'm trying to think of the very last thing I wrote. Oh yeah, I wrote a song about James Larkin, the great Irish Labour leader, and I think I did that while I was, every morning I go for a walk and a run, and I think I basically got that together while I was walking and running. But that wasn't the kind of normal way either. So I'm a bit confused by that question always.
Your songs have this really appealing simplicity to them, when in fact they're incredibly complex. To watch you perform a song, you've got melodies, counter melodies, and harmonies, and your phrasing, your singing phrasing and syncopation is quite unique and very much the Andy Irvine sound. So I guess that's what made me wonder, you know, how you come up with those runs and whether or not they must inspire each other. And has that been really informed by traditional music? How do you see that your songwriting has been informed in any obvious ways by the traditional music that you've encountered throughout your career?
Well, yes, I think all my songs are based really on the folk tradition, and Woody Guthrie a lot as well, of course. In that, you know, the songs are not poetry. You know, the way poets get up and they use long words and people love it or hate it. And but writing a song it's not a very high form of poetic art, or that is what one would be told by literate people. It's doggerel, basically. Like doggerel was a word that at school, if you wrote something in a poem in English lesson, the teacher would say, "Irvine, this is doggerel," you know, which was you get kind of 3 out of 10 for that. But doggerel is exactly what the folk songs are. So yeah, and I also discovered quite early on that accompanying songs was not within the tradition at that time. I think times move on and traditions change as times move. But in the early 60s, you know, playing an instrument was for dance music and singing was unaccompanied. So as soon as you started playing something behind a song, you were treading outside the tradition. And from there, I thought, well, I had a fairly good basic understanding of the tradition, and I trusted myself to push it out just a little bit, but not go over the top, like, you know. And sometimes, you know, I remember a review I got in the Los Angeles Times years ago. It wasn't a bad review, but the reviewer spoke about lounge chords. And I thought, yes, I like that. So yeah, I'm inclined to play a few lounge chords.
Lounge chords, Andy, that's hilarious. Oh, that sort of leads me to how one treats traditional music, I guess, in a context. I mean, through Planxty, you know, you have inspired an entire generation of traditional musicians and singers by pushing those boundaries a little bit. And what I'll do is we'll play another song that you've sent me and maybe use it as an example, Polly on the Shore. If you take a traditional song, Andy, that the story catches your imagination and the tune has something in it that you can hear, and I think that's what attracts us all essentially to a traditional song. How much do you feel you can rework that to make that your own? Is there something about a traditional song, an essence of it, that shouldn't be played with too much, or do you think that traditional song is fair play for any amount of interpretation?
No, I think you as I said, I trust myself to stay within the bounds that I would set myself, you know, that are not too far out. But I mean, this one, Polly on the Shore, is a heartbreaking song. I really it's quite hard to get through, because when you get to the verse about well, you'll hear it, but when you get towards the end, it's really moving. You know, you can this guy is kind of having been pressed into the Navy and fallen in a sea battle. Thinking of his Polly on the Shore and thinking, Jesus, what bad luck I had, you know, and it's a very moving song.
All right, we might have a listen to that now then. I'll pop that in. This is Polly on the Shore.
Come all you wild young men, a warning take by me, never to lead your single life astray, and into no bad company. As I myself have done, it being in the merry month of May, that I was pressed by a sea captain, and on board a man of war sent away. That I was pressed by a sea captain, and on board a man of war sent away. Well, we sailed on the ocean so wide, and our bonny, bonny flags we let fly. Let every man stand true to his gun, for the Lord knows who must die. Our captain was wounded full sore, and so were the rest of his men. Our mainmast rigging it lay scattered on the deck, so that we were obliged to give in. Our mainmast rigging it lay scattered on the deck, so that we were obliged to give in. Our decks, they were spattered with blood, and so loudly the cannons they did roar. And thousands of times have I wished myself at home, and all alone with me Polly on the shore. And thousands of times have I wished myself at home, and safe with me Polly on the shore. She's a tall and a slender girl, she's a dark and a rolling eye, and here am I lying bleeding on the deck, and for her sweet sake I would die. And here am I lying bleeding on the deck, and for her sweet sake I must die. So farewell to my family and friends, farewell to my dear Polly too. I never would have crossed the ocean so wide if I had been ruled by you. I never would have crossed the ocean so wide if I had been ruled by you.
I wanted to ask you some questions about political music. You've been inspired by Woody Guthrie, is one of your main inspirations musically. And I think I've heard you say that you first heard Woody Guthrie very early on in life. Can you remember what it was exactly that really attracted you? Was it sort of the message or the sound or the whole package?
I'd read about, you know, in the 1950s, there was a thing called a skiffle boom. And the main skiffler was Lonnie Donegan. And his early recordings were great. They were kind of acoustic, and I liked them a lot. By the time I discovered him, he had a drummer and an electric guitarist, and it wasn't the same thing at all. But well, they would no, just he'd moved on. You know, he'd become popular, and he just developed in the wrong direction, as I thought. But on the back of one of these records, it mentioned Woody Guthrie, and I thought, oh, a great name. You know, I never heard of anybody called Woody, and I thought it was a really nice name. And a little while later, I found this LP called More Songs by Woody Guthrie and Cisco Houston. And as soon as I put it on, the very first groove of the LP, I thought, yes, this is the music I've been looking for all my 15 years of life. And I was hooked after that, you know. I mean, Woody would record for Moses Ash in New York, and we went straight onto the disc. There was no chance of editing or doing anything, and he'd forget the words, and he'd play the wrong chords, and every mistake he made, I thought lovely. I loved it. And so he became part of me at that early stage, and I used to write to him when he was, Woody. By the time I discovered him, he was in a hospital, actually a mental hospital, because he had Huntington's disease, as they call it now, and he was unable to write back. But the people who took him out weekends would write to me and say how Woody was, and all the letters I wrote him were just, I think they knocked down the hospital about 7 or 8 years ago, and all the letters I wrote to Woody were found, and there they are now in the Woody Guthrie archive in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I copied them all, photographed them all, and it's like a diary, because I wrote him sometimes twice a week. But
Wow.
anyway, yes, most of my politically based songs are definitely based on Woody. I'm thinking for some reason I'm thinking of Viva Zapata, a song I wrote, and definitely has Woody all over it, and so I'm trying to keep on that tradition that Woody started, and in fact I've been threatening all these years to make an album of Woody Guthrie songs, and that's what I've been practicing the last 6 months since we got locked down and shut away. I've been practicing old Woody Guthrie songs, and some of them, the political ones, are pieces of history. Like nobody would remember Tom Mooney, who was jailed for 22 years after 1916 for a bomb which he did not explode at the Preparedness Walk in San Francisco, or indeed Henry Wallace, who was Roosevelt's vice president, but unfortunately not in his previous. He was the vice president in 1940 to 1944, but he was not the vice president in 1944. Harry Truman, by deviation, I would call it, became vice president, and thus when Roosevelt died in 1945, Harry Truman became president of America, and it should and could have been Henry Wallace, who was a peace-loving man, and many things might not have happened if Henry Wallace had been president of the United States in 1945. So
How
that's another song.
It's fascinating that it's a historical record. Is there any?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think, well, Tom Mooney, Henry Wallace, like Lindbergh, America First. Does anybody want to hear about this? So we'll see if they do or not. But
do you notice political song around you as much? Do you think it was more a feature of that period of time when Woody Guthrie was sort of writing? Had the Seegers and that whole kind of American topical song, I guess.
It doesn't seem to be. I wouldn't trust myself to know exactly everything that's going on, but political songwriting, which was so in favor in the 1960s, and there was some terrible songs written, but it doesn't seem to be thought of much these days. I don't hear too many political songs.
Mm. And is there anything else that you've discovered revisiting those songs from essentially your childhood? So they must be kind of etched into your mind in some ways, but are there other things that you've discovered going back and revisiting those songs?
Well, the basic difference between Woody and me is that he valued simplicity, so that on the odd occasion he would play one chord all the way through the whole song, and I am absolutely the opposite. I play the one chord all the way through the bar if you're lucky. But so it's definitely my interpretation of Woody Guthrie's songs, and it won't be. I've tried to keep some of it quite simple, but I'm not great at that.
Very much looking forward to what comes out of that too, Andy. Might start wrapping it up a little bit. There are a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. Can you remember what the first song was that you sang in public, not as an actor, but as a musician?
When I was an actor in London, my agent got me this. I don't know how he got it, but he got me this gig at somebody's 21st birthday party. And I sang Woody Guthrie songs, and they liked it. I mean, I can't imagine how they liked it, why they liked it, but they did. But that's not really answering the question. What was the first song? First song I would have sung. You know that song, "The Banks of Newfoundland"? How's it go? Run her up and dirty down with holy sun and sand. Doodle-dum, didey, down the banks of Newfoundland. I think that was something like that would have been quite early on. And in fact, the blacksmith that I still do probably is the oldest song in my repertoire. I used to keep notebooks back in the very early days, and there are set lists in it. And yeah, I don't think there's any song to rival the blacksmith from those days.
Yeah, it's such an iconic song, and certainly an iconic song of yours too, Andy. Last question. Do you have a good horror story about one live performance in your career that just went terribly wrong?
Falling off the stage, yes, done that. Once again, I'm blank with I'd have to think about that, because it would be quite good, quite an interesting story if one could think of a moment that would be
have a think about it. It's a funny thing because, you know, I think you're more rock and roll than the Rolling Stones, frankly, Andy. It's you are renowned as one of the most hardcore touring musicians that any of us have ever met, I think. And COVID must be a really strange time for you not to be on the road.
Yeah, well, it is, but yet I've enjoyed it. You know, I mean, Johnny Moynihan once said absolutely perfectly. He described me as being a drunk and a dissolute with pretensions to austerity. And I also have the other side of me, which is austerity. And the last 6 months have been the austere side. So I go running every morning, and I've enjoyed the discipline of that's been forced on us by COVID. But I do, I'm beginning to miss. I do miss the fact that I'd like to be traveling. All right, yeah. It's not the worst story I can ever remember, but I did. While we were discussing, I thought of a story that it wasn't a disaster, but it was a gig in Wanaka, in New Zealand, and the organizer had he had access to the classical music list of people, like, you know, and they all came, and the place was jam-packed. And as soon as I started doing what I do, I think they all realized they were in the wrong place. And all I remember at the end was I stood at as one does, I stood at the exit, saying, "Thank you very much, thank you," like a priest, and with my CDs all around me, that they might kind of maybe take a look at one and buy one. And they all walked out and looked at me with this kind of, "Thank you." Nobody said a word.
It's very uncomfortable.
It's the worst I can think of.
I'll play the Banks of Bann now, and just to finish up, I might get you to just speak a little bit about where you've come across that song, and a little bit about the origins of the song. And before I do that, I'll just say thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Ruthie. It's lovely to see you, and lovely to talk to you. And yeah, the Banks of the Bann. It's a very well-known song in the north of Ireland. I think a lot of people would sing it slower than I do, and would sing it with kind of that old feeling of oh, poor man didn't get the girl that he fancied. But poor man that didn't get the girl that he fancied. There are 1,000,001 songs, much more to the point than this one. I mean, he didn't get the girl because he didn't try. He only saw her, and he didn't even go up and say hello. But it's very interesting that the tune, which is lovely, is also a Protestant hymn tune. And the bit at the end that I play is another Protestant hymn tune. And whoever the Protestant minister who wrote these hymns and put them to those two tunes was, he had very, very good taste. The second one is a Welsh folk song, the title of which I did learn in Welsh, and I can't remember it now. But a lot of people, whenever I start singing the Banks of the Bann, there's somebody in the audience who you hear this muttering, you hear, and you think, oh, they recognize the tune from being a hymn. And yeah, so this is a good example of don't stay on that chord too long, Mr. Irvine.
When first to this country a stranger I came, I placed my affection on a maid that was young. She being fair and tender, her waist small and slender, kind nature had formed her from my overthrow. On the banks of the Bann where I first beheld her, she appeared like great Juno, that fair Grecian queen. Her eyes were like diamonds or stars brightly shining, and I thought her the fairest in this wide world I'd seen. It was her cruel parents that first caused our variance, because I was poor and of a low degree. But I'll use all my endeavour to gain my love's favour, although she is come from a rich family. Well, my name is Delaney, it's a name that won't shame me. Well, had I saved money, I would never have roamed, but drinking and sporting, night rambling and courting, they're the cause of my ruin and my absence from home. Had I all the money that lies in the Indies, or all the bright diamonds that's in the Queen's store, I would live here on the banks of the lovely Bann River, in all kinds of splendour with the girl I adore. poor fiddle wee girl, she's the cause of my woe.